this notion of the sales process that we've banked on for the last 40, 50 years, I'm almost at the point where I want to say like the sales process is dead. Almost. Buyers are able to do what I call an invisible evaluation. Just think about it. Just if you were going to make a buying decision, what do? You're not going to go to Google because like, look, if you're smart, and as soon as I go to Google, I start leaving breadcrumbs everywhere. Now, guess what I'm getting? I'm getting inbound emails, I'm getting phone calls, I'm getting ads served up to me, all because I went to Google. The reality is this, we're not in stages, we're in situations. So the situation could be like, for an example, I am problem aware, like I'm aware I have a problem, but I'm not urgency aware. I know something is broken, I just not really sure where it fits in my list of priorities in terms of what needs to be fixed now. There's so many different situations that a buyer is likely stepping into now because of the way in which they can interact with information.
Welcome to Go-to-Market Science. In this podcast, we share tangible, actionable playbooks from the trenches, working as go-to-market strategy and RevOps consultants for our clients here at Union Square Consulting, and candid conversations with revenue leaders in the market that have been there. Now let's get into it. Today, we're going to talk about how buyers using AI is changing the sales process. Our special guest today is Doug Landis, CRO and co-founder of StoryPath.ai. StoryPath helps enterprise revenue teams turn pre-call planning into situational preparation. We turn outside-in buyer context into sharper insights, buyer-specific stories, and clear next steps, so sellers can show up with confidence, communicate with meaning, and earn the next conversation. If it wasn't already apparent, I was reading that off the screen. It's not we, it's them. But I hope you got the message anyway. And I'm not going to go and redo that take.
It is a we. We're all trying to do the same thing. I mean, you know, like we are all on the same page trying to do what's best for our customers. So there you go. It's a collective we.
Absolutely. So Doug was a former growth partner at VC firm Emergence Capital, where we got to know each other. He was a former Chief Storyteller and VP of Sales Productivity at Box. And over the course of 11 plus years, Doug was leading sales training at Google, Salesforce, and Box. So a lot of experience leading sales training, talking about how sellers can sell better. And that's what we're going to get into today. So here's what I want to talk about. Buyers are increasingly using AI to research solutions without triggering any intent signals, without engaging sales until later in the cycle. How does the sales process need to adapt to this new normal? Doug, thanks for joining us today to answer these questions.
Nah, I'm excited. Let's effing go. It's great to see you too, by the way. And to your audience, like, I don't know who your audience is, other than the fact that I know you're all operators, and in the world of operating right now, shit's just changing, and it's changing wicked fast. And I think the biggest thing that's changing right now is the buyer-seller relationship, and that's it. That's affecting not only sellers and how they show up, it's affecting buyers and what they're already doing ahead of time, but it's also affecting RevOps and operators and how we're thinking about how we support the process, whatever the process is or might be. So this is a really important conversation to have. And it's very top of mind.
And I'm happy to give you context. I don't know who our audience is either. I can tell you like the ages that show up on Spotify and Apple, but I'll tell you who we make this show for. It's primarily for chief revenue officers in mature organizations, and to a slightly lesser extent, VPs of RevOps and other strategic go-to-market leaders. We got a lot of CMOs that listen to the shows, CFOs, et cetera. And our main thing is trying to figure out, how do we blend the strategy and the process and the systems? We do that in our work, and that's what we talk about on this show. And this is a great opportunity for this particular topic because all anyone's talking about is AI. And every single post on LinkedIn is how there's this new prompt that you can slap into Claude and you can double the productivity of your sales team. And nobody's talking about how this is changing the buyer journey. So I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah. Actually, you know what they're really not talking about, which is what I want to double click into, is how, this notion of the sales process that we've banked on for the last 40, 50 years, it needs to change. I'm almost at the point where I want to say like the sales process is dead. Almost. I'm not fully going to say that because I know that's going to perk a lot of hairs on people's arms. Like, what? We just spent all this money instituting this new sales process. What are you talking about? But I will say this, the old school linear seller controlled version is. There's a twist. Oh, well, took the pin out of the hand grenade, threw it over the fence. Let's see what blows up.
Well, let me take the bait here for a second, because
I know I'm teeing it up for you here, Eddie. Come on.
Well, okay. So, I think you've been in this game a little bit longer than me. But I started my sales career, depending on where you draw the line, because I started selling before I was even in college, but I'll just draw the line at around the year 2000. And I remember even at that point in time, hearing similar things. Oh, buyers are using the internet. People come in, they're already prepared. They know the product better than you know as a seller. They have all the pricing. I was selling cars like in like college. They know exactly what like the invoice is on the car, et cetera, et cetera. They know more about the car than you do. Okay, cool. And then now fast forward 26 years and I'm hearing buyers are using AI to research. So what's the delta for you? You've been selling even longer than me. Obviously, the internet's not a new thing. Buyers doing research online is not a new thing. Nope. How's this evolved and changed over 30 years?
So I believe the environment between buying and selling is way more fluid and dynamic right now than it ever has been before because of what everyone has available at their fingertips. Before, buyers were able to do research. Yes, true. Absolutely. And before, sellers followed a very static, linear, old school sales process. Let me take you through my discovery questions and then demo and then negotiate and then close, right? Like pretty standard canned process, if you will. What I believe now has changed is in this more dynamic, fluid environment that we live in, we now need to start thinking about this notion of how do we operationalize situational fluency? What does that mean? To me, that means helping a seller understand actually where your buyer is. What does your buyer already believe? What are their beliefs walking into the situation or conversation? What do they need to resolve? What actions are going to move the deal forward? So it's a matter of moving from like process compliance, like follow my process. By the way, do you remember how like we moved from sales process to the buyer journey? Do you know what changed? The words. Nothing actually changed in the process, just the words. So what is this notion of like going from process compliance, which is basically what we've all, the like CROs, we do this, like, how to comply? Like, are you following all the steps and the sales stages? And it's not to say that that's completely wrong. We just need to shift it to this notion of what I'm calling buyer fluency. Because what's happening right now is like most sales processes are like, they operated in a world where the seller had control, right? I'm going to discover, I'm going to do my demo, I'm going to, propose, and I'm going to close. And super tidy, it's very CRM friendly. But I don't think we live in that world today, especially given what you said in the beginning, which is like what? 80% of the buying process is done without ever engaging a seller. Like, what is it? 60 some odd % of buyers would prefer to actually buy something without an actual sales conversation because it's just like, they're not getting a whole lot of value out of those conversations. And so it's like, the question you have to ask is like, how do we stop forcing our buyers into our process and start helping sellers respond to the buyer's actual situation? That's what I mean by situational fluency.
Yeah. And so I did, multiple hours of research before this podcast and went all over your website and read all your stuff, and the audience doesn't have that advantage. And so I want to unpack a little bit about what I read. And, on your website, you talk a lot about how this buyer journey has changed and how they're using AI to move even further through the process. And I'll summarize it by saying, I think people were researching things online. You go and you Google a couple different solutions, you end up reading through a white paper, maybe there's some gated content, and now, you're spitting off intent signals. And then at some point in time, you've got to reach out to the sales rep to find pricing information, other things. And I think pricing is a really good example where even that, like, you're trying to backdoor it and figure out, like, is there some like Reddit thread that will tell me what their pricing is? Because I don't want to have to talk to a sales rep just to find out their pricing. And now AI can do all that for you. Can you elaborate on how that's really changing the buyer journey right now?
Yeah, totally. Well, buyers are able to do what I call an invisible evaluation, right? So just think about it. Just if you were going to make a buying decision, what do? You're not going to go to Google because, like, look, if you're smart, and as soon as I go to Google, I start leaving breadcrumbs everywhere. Now, guess what I'm getting? I'm getting inbound emails. I'm getting phone calls. I'm getting, ads served up to me, all because I went to Google. So if I'm making an important buying decision right now, so let's just say like I'm looking for a new AI for CRM. I'm not, by the way, just everybody listening. But let's just say that was the case. So what I'm going to do? I'm going to open up Claude and be like, hey man, because Claude's my buddy. Like, hey, here's my situation. I need to find a new CRM. I'm not happy with what we're currently using. And here are all my parameters. Here is what I'm currently using. Here's what I like and don't like about it. Here, I want you to help me think through my options. Here's what I can afford on a monthly basis. Here's what's really important to me, integrations, etc. So like I can just map all this out. Claude will build me a plan and be like, great, Claude, now whittle this down to 2 particular vendors. Help me understand which one might be a better fit. Help me understand what questions still need to be addressed once I actually do have a conversation with a salesperson, because I feel like fundamentally I will want to, because I want to understand them. I want to know the level of support I'm going to get. I want to have a human that's in the loop with me in this process. But guess what? I've gotten 95% of the way through the buying process before I actually have a conversation with a salesperson, before I even engage with the company. Like I don't need to go to their website. I don't need to go to a webinar. I don't need to click on their materials. Like I'm good.
And to me, when I hear that, the way I interpret this is that it's the same as it was before, and that buyers are doing the majority of their research before talking to sales, but they're going even further. They've got more insights, less questions need to be answered about features and functionalities and pricing. And so how does that change how a seller needs to approach the first call?
Yeah. Well, I think a couple things need to happen. Number one, sellers just need to not necessarily assume, but have a very strong hypothesis that your buyer is already doing this level of research. And the difference before is what buyers were doing was researching and they were getting data back. And then they would have to extrapolate that data and then use that to help them kind of form their list of questions or the things they need to better understand before they get on the call with a seller, right? Now I can have a back and forth conversation with the bots, right? They're like, okay, what am I missing? What about pricing? What's my angle if I want to go in and negotiate with them? What could I actually do? So I'm having this conversation now. It's kind of the preset conversation before I actually talk to sales. Whereas before I'd have to do all that work on my own. So here's the difference from a seller's point of view. If a seller doesn't anticipate that their buyers are actually already doing this, then they're going back in and they're thinking, well, what stage is this opportunity in? Oh, this is sitting at stage 1. So I need to do discovery. The better question that we should be asking is, what buying situation are we actually in? What is the situation that we're stepping into? And in fact, if you're going to go into a model or if you're going to go into StoryPath, one of the things I always suggest, like your prompt or the conversation you want to have with the model is like, explain the situation you're in. Now, if you're in our product, we already have the context of the opportunity, so that's really easy. We already understand everything that's going on. If you're in another model, then you probably need to give it some more context. But the reality is this. This is what I mean by situational fluency. We're not in stages. We're in situations. So the situation could be like, for an example, I am problem aware. Like I'm aware I have a problem, but I'm not urgency aware. I know something is broken. I just not really sure where it fits in my level of my list of priorities that, in terms of what needs to be fixed now. So, right. So it's like, you've had a conversation with somebody like, yeah, this is an issue. Or like, yeah, we've talked for a long time. We've been thinking about a long time fixing this, but that's like, there's no urgency there. That's just the situation I'm in. That's different than it's like, okay, I've already been doing all this. I've been breadcrumbing and you've got all this signal and I'm actively looking because I spent a ton of time on the pricing page. You knew I spent a ton of time on the pricing page. You're kind of walking into that situation a little differently because you've got more context. And now the power is kind of shifted to buyers. Like, buyers, the situation, like I might be solution shopping. I might be curious, but not really ready to commit. I might be like, I'm kicking the tires, but I have no idea how to build consensus because I'm new. Like there's so many different situations that a buyer is likely stepping into now because of the way in which they can interact with information. That's different than before.
Makes perfect sense. Let me go even a step back before we go a step forward and ask about call preparation. So let's just say that, I'll stay away from outbound for the moment. And let's say this lead came inbound because they're doing all this research. And it's the first call that the sales rep is having, whether they're an SDR, BDR, AE, what have you. What type of, how would you change the way that you think about call prep and account research prior to the first call?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a couple things. Number one, I think we need to automatically anticipate the fact that they've done an enormous amount of research. Just anticipate that. And if that's the case and it came inbound, then that likely means that we could be one of two or three potential partners that they're evaluating. Like they've likely whittled it down from 10 to 3. By the way, how cool would it be if right out of the gates, you just kind of call that out and be like, I'm curious, is that where you are in your kind of, buyer fluency right now? Is that where you are in, you're like, is this your current situation, I guess? And by the way, I hate using those words, current situation, because there's many of us old school sellers that are hardwired to say spin selling. What's my situation, problem, impact, need, payoff, right? But like, what I'm really trying to assess is like, what is this, the current buyer situation? But think about this from a pre-call planning. Some of the questions that I am going to think about ahead of time are maybe a little different. Maybe it's like, what might the buyer already know about us, about what value we deliver, about who we work with, about, how we've solved problems like this before. Other questions I might consider are things like, well, what do I think this buyer might be trying to figure out right now that they maybe weren't able to figure out by jumping into a chatbot? Who else might be involved in this? Because every decision involves, 8 to 10 people if it's over $10,000. How about this? This is the important one. What beliefs do they already have, or might they already have? Because I don't know for sure. And the reason why I keep using the word might is because these are things that I just want to pressure test or validate or refute in this conversation. Other things like what proof might be necessary for them in order for them to build some confidence, in order to build some internal champions. And of course, lastly, like what story might work best for them, and in terms of their ability to actually have a really rich and compelling conversation internally. Because like buyers, look, 90% of a deal is done when you're not in the room, right? So these are the things that I want to be thinking about in my pre-call planning. It's not just like, here's what you have to know about them. Here's what questions to ask. Here's what objections you likely face. I don't know why I put on like big surfer voice, but I think it's just like feels very rudimentary when you start thinking about different questions based on the fact that they've already done this homework. I think it kind of changes the way in which you prepare. So that's a great framing.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I've been in sales, like I said, for like 30 years. I've still never understood the concept of objection handling. You either have a problem you want to solve or you don't. And I don't get this whole like, let's do the Ben Franklin close and like draw a line down the middle of the paper. It's like, okay, I don't know. Maybe I'm just not a great salesperson, but never figured that out.
But here's the thing, though. What you're doing is you're distinguishing the fact that it's not objection handling. I'm actually stepping into a situation where maybe they're curious, or they're afraid, or there's too much risk on the table, or they just need to better understand some things, right? So objection handling is like, this is a thing that you do, like conversational awareness in the moment means like, hey, I'm picking up on the fact that Eddie, yesterday when we had a conversation, or last week when we had a conversation, you were super hyped. You had a plan in place, but now it feels like something's changed. Like I am now just awake and aware to this energy shift that's happened. What happened the last week?
Yeah, and I will not pretend to be the world's best salesperson, but the way that I think about it is I'm just trying to solve a problem. And the way you describe it, it's like, we're trying to solve this problem together. Maybe things have shifted and it's more difficult to sell internally. And if you're the buyer in this scenario, I'm just like, Doug, like, how can I help you solve your problem? And so that's where objection handling has always thrown me off. I'm like, it just feels like manipulative. I'm like, let's just roll our sleeves up together and try to figure this out. And if there's not something to figure out, that's okay. We can both part ways as friends. But anyway, I want to take this back. As I mentioned in the pre-call, we want to leave our audience with these like, tangible takeaways. And I was planning to leave this to the end, but if I'm a CRO and let's say I've got 100 salespeople, right? And I'm a CRO and I just heard everything that you shared on the pre-call planning. How do I turn this into a process that's going to result in my salespeople actually executing on the things that you shared? Since you have so much experience at doing this exact thing, like how do you think about rolling this out across the sales org, specifically right now, since we just talked about it on the pre-call planning?
On the pre-call planning, that's a great question. So I think there's a couple things. I'll give you like 4 steps to take that you can actually take from I'm going to call process perspective, but let's move away from process and call it more buyer fluency. or buyer situation, or how do we raise our situational awareness? Like, let's just call this situational selling. Like, come on, let's come up with a whole new phrase. You guys heard it here first. We're coming out with this. But like, here's an example. So instead of thinking of the sales skill as discovery, right? What we really need to focus on is interpretation. Do you know the people who are the really great sellers? They're just like aware of what's happening, right? And so it's like a great seller to me can interpret the buyer's context really, really fast, and can actually operate within that new context, right? So it's like, so if you think about it, like what I'm doing is I'm going to train my sellers on how to interpret buyer situations versus how to ask you a series of questions, which feels oftentimes like a Spanish Inquisition.
Well, for me, a lot of this, like what you're describing, comes down to like emotional intelligence, right? It's like, am I following this script, or am I interpreting what I'm seeing and meeting the buyer where they are?
Yeah. So how about this? So you want some tactical suggestions, ideas. How about this? I'm going to call this, and y'all are like, you guys are hearing a lot of stuff for the first time. But this is like the future. This is what I believe is like the future of selling. And I'm just stoked about it because this is what the models are actually creating. So we're going to start the tactical ideas or recommendations is we're going to build a buyer situation operating model. What is that? Oh my gosh.
It's what not a naming convention, Doug.
Yeah. The BSOM. I love
All right.
BSOM. You heard it here first. Okay, so check this out. So instead of like, the 22-step or 38-step sales methodology, nobody else needs another laminated, hostage note of like, ooh, let's do this, right? So what I think the first thing that we have to do is we have to kind of define our buyer situations. What are like the most common buying situations your team sees? Define those. Like, a common one would be like they're educated but not committed. I've got a champion without consensus. A situation might be an AI generated shortlist, right? So they've already compared us with a whole bunch of folks, and they've already done this whole like AI evaluation. So part of maybe what I need to do is reframe the criteria, right? So like if they're educated but not committed, let's say I need to they understand the category and maybe they've done a ton of research, but there's no urgency there. So like, how do I go? So my conversation needs to be about like creating urgency. How do we create urgency, right? It could very well be like build versus buy, right? They're doing their analysis to determine like if we should build this, and if so, what's fully involved. So there's buyer situations that are common to every single organization. So CROs out there, go build those. What are the top 10 buyer situations we most commonly face? Like executive pressure, I don't know, no decision drift, whatever it may be. Then, so number 2, create your NBAs, next best actions for every situation. Right. So for each situation, go back to that pre-call planning process and define what does the seller need to understand? What belief needs to change? And by the way, belief is so important. Like belief is a really big deal. We have to understand that like most buyers have some predisposition. They've got some belief, especially if they're doing a ton of work ahead of time and they're in a model. They're already kind of creating a framing in their head of like, oh, I believe that this one's a little better. This one might be a better fit. Oh, I know Eddie's friends with these folks. They're like, I believe whatever FUD that happens to exist out there in the market. There's some belief that they have that we need to better understand and in order to change that.
I love that, by the way. And if I could just touch on that, like I've basically been selling some version of Salesforce for the last 15 years. First the actual product and now, the RevOps around it. And for me, it was always like, I don't want to try to change somebody's religion. If there's a revenue leader out there that's like, look, we just need to make more calls and use our whiteboard and, go around the horn and ask everybody what's going on with their deal. Like that's the way to hit our number. I'm like, it's too difficult for me to change your beliefs Or I don't know why, but I thought of Michael Jordan. I remember watching this documentary where he started lifting weights, and that was like a new thing in the NBA. Now it's not. Like the idea that you're going to be lifting weights and have a nutritionist and like you're using science to like become a better athlete. But if you go back to like the 70s or 80s, like nobody believed in that stuff. So there had to have been a point in time where somebody was trying to sell that, and it was really hard because everybody's like, why would I do all that stuff? And now everybody believes it.
Yeah. So think about this. So like, I think every CRO, every sales leader, every rep should just ask themselves, what do I think the buyer already believes? Like, what narrative are they already carrying into this conversation, right? Do they believe that the problem is urgent? Do they believe that the category is important? Do they believe the category is commoditized? Do they believe that they can solve it themselves? Do they believe that their incumbent is good enough? Do they believe that the risk of change is too high? I don't know, but if I create a list of beliefs that the buyer likely has or might have, guess what? This is part of the conversation that I want to go in and have to try and uncover and potentially refute, right? Because if I can't identify the right belief, then I can't actually help them choose the right move. Now, by the way, here's an interesting thing when it comes to belief, and this is what I love this that we're having this conversation. So if you think about like what stories actually do, and I love the Michael Jordan example, stories create belief. Just think about that for a second. This is why I've been on this, like, I don't know, this maybe a tiny little soapbox for way too long, and it feels like it's about to break, but like on the soapbox about storytelling, because stories create belief. And you know what storytelling does? It's the mechanism that gets people to believe. This is why I think every salesperson needs to become a better storyteller, because it's the mechanism to actually transfer that belief. Stories create the belief, customer stories, the experiences that people are having, the aha moments, right? Not case studies. Those are not stories. Those are case studies. But as a seller, you need to get really good at being able to recreate or tell stories in every conversation, because that's going to help you transfer belief. Anyway, belief is a really, really big part of this process, right? That I'm recommending. Like, so your next best action for every situation, one of the situations is, well, what do we think they might already believe? And as a result of that belief, what action should we recommend?
Quick pause. Everything we talk about on this show, diagnosing go-to-market ops, prioritizing projects for revenue impact, processes, metrics, insights, building a predictable go-to-market engine, we've built frameworks for all of it. They're free and ungated on our website, unionsquareconsulting.com/frameworks. The link will also be in the show notes, so make sure you check that out. All right, back to the episode.
I want to drill down a layer further, and I'm going to stick on the whole process thing, because what I'm hearing a lot of really amazing questions that a rep can be asking themselves, eventually asking the customer, doing their research, et cetera. But let's say you've got a 100-person sales team. How do you actually get them to do this consistently? So I'm imagining you've got some documents you might hand them. Here's like a set of questions to ask yourself or the client. There's training. And then after that, what? How do you ensure that your reps are actually following this process? And as we talked offline, not necessarily to a T, like paint by numbers, but how do you get them to execute this consistently?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, look, we everybody likes frameworks, and everybody likes, kind of like, I tend to think of an ELI 5. You know what that means?
I don't.
Explain it like I'm 5.
Okay.
ELI 5. So how do we make this really simple? Well, we give them a framework. So here's an example. So let's say one of the beliefs are I've got a champion in there, but they've got no consensus, right? So as a seller, what do I need to understand? That's my first question. I need to understand who else needs to believe. Great. Awesome. So what belief needs to change? Well, maybe the belief is that this is not a top priority for everybody else in the organization, or it doesn't solve a shared business problem. Cool. So I can actually fill these in. So like, okay, are there assets that I could use that can help me transfer this belief or align everybody around this problem to build consensus? Perhaps. I don't know. This is where I'm going to go and pull out some assets. What questions might I ask to help drive a conversation around building consensus? Things like, when you discuss this problem, when we're not having a conversation, when we're not in the room, what do you kind of expect you might hear from your peers or from other people that are likely going to be involved in this conversation? And then let's map out like, okay, what are the next steps in order for us to earn another conversation? So the reality is we've got to put something in practice. Like we got to make something practical, like a simple framework for a rep to follow. Right. So there's the first step is like, okay, let's define the buyer situation. Second step is create next best actions for every situation. And in particular, make sure you get into what belief needs to change, because that's a really big one, because people actually move based on their beliefs. The third step is like, let's redesign opportunity reviews around the buyer reality. Right. Pipeline reviews are like seller theater. Well, what's the next step? I talked to this person. Great. They committed. They said they're interested. Right. But like the question is, if we can continue to use those 5 questions, let's shift the conversation to like, what is the buyer's reality? What are they still trying to resolve? Who's missing from the conversation? What's the cost of doing it? I mean, these are things we're already talking about, but we need to talk about in the context of the buyer's reality.
So I love this, and I want to share a story that kind of articulates where I'm coming from with this set of questioning.
Great.
So you mentioned spin selling. You asked me if I'm familiar with it. Yes and no.
Okay.
So I was the first AE at a fintech startup that built a solution for private equity and venture capital on top of Salesforce. So we were effectively selling Salesforce licenses, where I was like the one and only sales rep in the company. So my boss, who didn't have like a long history of being in sales himself, hands me the spin selling book. Here's spin selling. Knock yourself out. I read through the book. And I spent an entire year trying to figure out how to implement it. And I remember when I interviewed at Salesforce, they're like, you need to do a presentation walking us through your sales process. And I remember putting together this presentation and trying to talk about how I used spin selling to sell at this previous company. It was the worst presentation ever. I don't know why Salesforce hired me. It was awful. I never understood it because there was no reinforcement layer. I didn't walk into Salesforce and, you worked there as well. I mean, you were part of this. They just serve it up to you on a silver platter. And I remember going to training maybe 6 months into the job, and I'm sitting in training like, I already know all this stuff because this has been like baked into like the muscle memory of like the daily motion. And specific things come to mind. One, specific fields that would now be like medic fields on the opportunity page layout in Salesforce. There was a rigorous sort of like pipeline review by management of like, hey, looking at all the deals, especially the bigger, more mature deals, and calling things out. Hey, do you know who your decision maker is? Do you know what like their decision making criteria is, et cetera, et cetera. SEs constantly like grilling you about deals on the same exact set of questions. Not to mention, of course, like now, like since I've left Salesforce and they were using Quip for the last number of years, like seeing like the same questionnaire copy pasted into Quip. And you just see like I've worked with hundreds of AEs at Salesforce and you see like they're all asking the same questions. How do you think about making sure that training turns into like daily muscle memory? That's where I was going with that question.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's like 3 elements. I mean, part of the reason why it landed with you and when you got to Salesforce, you're like, I already know all this, is because you...
Not when I got to Salesforce, I went to training 6 months into my tenure at Salesforce.
Yeah, right. Fair point. But still, 6 months in, you're like, oh yeah, get it. I mean, what does that tell you? That is like, that it has to be something that is simple to follow, repeatable, and people have had success with it. When those 3 things exist, then it's easy to get buy-in, because fundamentally we're all just trying to get buy-in, right? So this whole notion of like buyer fluency, we got to get buy-in on that. Otherwise, if people are like, great, that sounds like a bunch of fluff, it's like, then it's going to fall flat, right? And so what do we do? It's like, well, how do we explain this in practical terms? What does this actually mean for a seller in terms of the things that they need to do and understand? And then how do we continue to reinforce it? And how do we show success stories or examples of how this is actually used in practice? Because without those, each and every one of those steps, it's going to, any program you want to implement without those steps, things are going to fall flat. Right. So it goes down to redesigning a manager deal review. So typically in a manager deal review, it's like, well, what's the next step? How about this? Managers, ask your rep this. What does the buyer need to believe next? Think about that. It's different from what's the next step, because that's seller focused. It's shifted to what does the buyer need to believe next? The buyer needs to believe that they can actually get their CMO to come to a meeting to have a conversation about this. That's what the buyer needs to believe can happen.
Love that. Absolutely love that.
Like instead of enablement support, like more content, like let's organize content by buyer situations, not products or sales stages.
It makes sense. So let me move on to the next piece in the
What do you
sales
got?
process. So we talked about pre-call planning. We talked about the first call. When I was reading through your website, you touched on re-engaging the deal when it stalls, or even just following up on the deal as it's not moving. Like, could you talk a little bit more about that? You shared some specific examples on your website, and I would love if you'd drill into that, because I think it's such a common challenge where it's like, oh, we had a first good call or two, and then now what? I'm checking in, Doug. I just wanted to check in with you.
Well, we know checking in or touching base doesn't work. Thanks, John Barrows, for that. Touching base and checking in never works. I mean, look, I think at the end of the day, what's the purpose of every call? It's to earn the next call. The purpose of every conversation is to earn the next conversation. And so I think the important thing is less about what do we need to do next? And first and foremost, make sure that we're on the same page. Have we earned another conversation? And if so, who else needs to be involved in that conversation? If so, what do we need to accomplish in that conversation? What belief do we need to help you navigate in that next conversation? What beliefs do the other people who are going to be involved in this conversation, what might they likely have? And so, when I think about, and you'll notice there's a couple things. Number one, we're constantly focusing on earning the next conversation, which is our job as sellers. And we're also thinking about multiple stakeholders involved in the deal, because there's going to be multiple people involved in the deal. And the reason why a lot of deals stall is because we can't get enough momentum amongst the buying group. One person is excited and interested and they want to dig in and learn more. And the problem to everybody else, the problem just isn't big enough. Either because they feel like it's not that relevant or important to them in their role and what they're trying to accomplish, or fundamentally, that person just doesn't have enough clout in the organization to pull together a group to have a deeper conversation or discussion. So, post-meeting is I think, again, this is, here's the crazy thing. I'm a linguist at heart. Language and words matter. And so even just the follow-up from the previous conversation you just had with somebody to ensure we've earned the right for another conversation, it's that language that you even use, right? In hey, here's what it sounded to me was really important. Here are some of the beliefs that you might currently have that we know we need to maybe unpack. Here's where you shared in terms of other people needing to be involved or likely needing to be involved. And here are some beliefs that they might have. Cool. Have we earned the right to another conversation? If so, what do we need to do in order to get it on the books?
Love that. And I think my biggest takeaways from hearing you walk through this is just that, to me, it's just so much more of a human sale. And I think the thing that really grates me and a lot of other people is when you're working with a sales rep and you feel like they're just sort of robotically going through this step-by-step process, and they're not really appreciating the situation that you're in, the challenges that you're facing, how you're having to sell this internally, the risk factors that you're facing, et cetera, et cetera. And I think I sometimes take that for granted because, when we try to talk about sales process, we're talking about this spectrum that goes from the SDR that was just promoted in their first small business AE role and has never tried to close a deal before, all the way up to the enterprise rep closing the $10 million deal. And that is a very, very wide spectrum. And on the left side of that spectrum, unfortunately, it's these folks are given this playbook and they're just trying to figure it out. And I think this is a really an unfortunate reality of sales, is I think that especially junior salespeople, they just get nervous and they fall back on their script or their bullet points or what have you, not because they don't have the emotional intelligence to understand that it's just not a fit, but just that they're not sure what to do next.
By the way, I'm not either. I've been doing this for a really long time. Here's a real live situation. Now, I'll give you, I was just thinking about this. I have a customer that we've been working with. I know the SVP of sales. I know the AVP on the West. He's an old friend of mine. We got 3 people already. They were cool, let's just do a quick POC on this. It's got 15 days. We've got RevOps involved. We've got everybody involved. And I mean, literally all top to bottom, we're cool, let's do it. Smaller company, but who cares? We want everybody on our product. And poosh, totally disappeared. Ghosted. And I've reached out a few times. I'm yeah, sorry, we're just really busy. I finally reached out to the head of RevOps, and I was so feel like this is no longer a priority. Something's changed. What's up? Because I don't know what to do. Like, I don't want to sit here and keep bugging you guys. You keep talking about how what you're doing right now, isn't giving you, kind of what you need. But here's two problems that I recognize. One, they're killing it, right? So they're being successful without having some of the things in place that they think are necessary and important. You know what? If they're killing it, then they're killing it, and like, right on. Congratulations, right? It's like when something's working, you don't want to stop and try and like introduce something new because you're like, it's already working. And so like, you may not always have the answer to every situation, but guess what I did when I reached out to RevOps person? I just called out the situation. Like, it feels like the situation's changed. We did all this stuff, but now the situation has changed. What's changed and what should we do about it? And he was like, feel like we should just put everything on a pause right now. And he explained the situation. He's like, literally end of quarter, this happened, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, cool. So I took that note. I'm like, great, reached back out to SVP. And I was like, feels like everything's changed. The situation's changed. You guys are killing it. Like, cool. Like, let's have another conversation when things are not working. Not much I can do about that.
This is a perfect segue into like one of my next questions, which is, how do we know when to walk away from a deal? You and I talked offline about how the best reps always know when to walk away. And this is a perfect example of that. How do you think about that from like on an organizational level? Like, I'll give you a concrete example that I'm thinking through here. I can't tell you how many clients we have where we start working with them, and the first time we look at the pipeline, it's just full of like zombie pipeline. Like, these deals are never going to close. They're, 3 times the sales cycle. Like, they haven't had a meeting in a month. I mean, you've seen this as many times as I have. In this new normal that you're describing with all this AI research, how are you thinking about disqualifying deals or moving deals out of the pipeline and knowing when to walk away?
So I think the first thing is we got to get out of this old sales process where we're talking about what stage are we in, because that orients the conversation in the wrong direction. I think we need to be more buyer centric and buyer focused. What situation is the buyer in? What does the buyer believe? And because when we understand those, if we understand what the buyer believes, for example, the company I was just telling you about, my hunch is they believe they've got enough tooling and they've got enough to do right now. And whatever they're doing is working. So my hunch is their belief is like, we don't really have capacity to introduce anything new. And we're also being really successful. So like, we're kind of good. All right, great. I think so like the more buyer centric we get in how we think about every one of our deals, it starts to shift us to being smarter about the judgment that we're using about every deal, right? It's not just about activity. It's about judgment of the deal. Like in this particular case, it's like, look, I've got a great relationship with all of them. And like, look, I'm not going to waste your time. I don't want to waste my time either. I got so much to do. Now, this becomes really difficult when you're an organization that's maybe overhired and you're like, you can maybe see getting to your number. Like there's only 1 or 2 paths to get to your number and every deal counts, right? That's like the scarcity mentality. I get it. Totally been there. And in that situation, like we all have happy years. By the way, I do it too. I mean, like none of us are impervious to not doing these things because we do. So like, are we just being honest with ourselves? And going back to like how do we operationalize judgment in our own organization?
It's interesting though, because it's like, I can't tell if you're saying like, let's do things the way Salesforce did it, or let's do it the opposite. But the way I'm hearing it, I'm thinking like, at least the team I was on, the way things operated, there was a lot of that very like, older methodology, but like you've got all these different fields in Salesforce. Sometimes they're filled out, sometimes they're not. And you have this level of intelligence that a group of people can use to sit around and have a really well-informed conversation. And it was never just like, what's the next step? They might have been slightly different questions from what you're sharing, but the experience that I had, which is part of the reason why I started this company and became passionate about this topic, is that I felt like I was just constantly getting the same series of questions from everyone in the organization and questions that made sense. Like, what are the red flags? Like who's the decision maker? What are they like? How are they evaluating this decision? How are they selling this internally? All of these questions. And I felt like you just got it again and again and again, day after day after day, to the point where like, if you don't get it after a couple months, like I don't know what you've been doing at work all day. And for me, like, that's so powerful. And then you translate that into management deal reviews. And I think it's the same thing that you're saying. It's like, I can imagine an organization where if the manager ever looks at the pipeline, they're just like, what's the next step on this deal? What's the next step on this deal? What's the next step on this deal? And that's obviously not deep enough. And when it comes down to saying like, where's this buyer at in this journey? What do they need to do next? I love the idea of what do they need to believe next? And how do they get to this place where they solve this problem, or do they need to? And I love the idea that you're sharing in this particular example, because as a buyer, I feel this, I think we all do. We get these like emails 15 times a day, and it's like, here's a new problem that you're probably facing in your business. And I'm like, yeah, I didn't know I had that problem, but I probably do. But you know what? Like, I've got 99 problems and I can only focus on one of them right now.
Totally.
And that problem that you just emailed me about is not the one I'm focused on.
Not the one. And by the way, that's why we say like generating pipeline and getting meetings about timing and relevance. Like, it could be a perfect fit, but the timing's off because you know what? Like, guess what? In a week, do you know what everybody needs listening to this? In a week, Eddie's not going to have any time for anybody because he's about to have a baby. Another one. And so, sorry, I hope that wasn't too personal to share.
No, you're fine, but it'll be like 6 weeks before we publish this thing. But yeah.
Oh yeah, well, fine, okay, but either way, you're still going to be in the middle of diapers and poop and trying to navigate.
I'm already in it, man. The first one hasn't gotten out of that stage.
So this is what I mean. You're going to be doubly in it. So the reality is anybody who wants to do a deal with you has got to recognize, like, whew, this thing has got to be a hair on fire problem for you in order to put any energy behind it, because otherwise you're just not going to have capacity for a while. Cool. So if I know that, guess what? I'm going to support that. Doesn't mean I'm going to stop reaching out to you. I might do some nurturing. I might be like, hey, and because at some point the timing is going to click and you're going to be like, I need to have a conversation with Doug. That, like, because I've earned it over time.
But I would argue, even if that wasn't the situation, even if I'm literally like sitting on the beach, toes in the stand, sipping margaritas, which I vividly remember closing this deal in 2018, shortly after I started this business, and exactly that situation, it doesn't matter. Because like, at least for me, I'm a big believer in focus. And I'm like, you know what? If this isn't a hair on fire problem, I could be making the next cold call. I could be hiring the next sales rep. I could be hiring a CRO in my organization. There's something else that I could be doing than this thing that you're talking to me about, Mr. Seller. And unless my hair is on fire, I've already got a list of priorities that's more important than that.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, and so part of our job as sellers is to try and anticipate the 18 other priorities that you likely have that are likely more important than having this conversation. That's part of our job, is like to anticipate, like, hey, listen, I appreciate the fact that you have taken the time to have this conversation. I want to make sure that we both get the most value out of this conversation. At the end of the day, my job is to earn the right to have another conversation. If I have not done that, then we walk away. Everything's good. You go put your feet back in the sand, drink another margarita on me. Right? I mean, if I'm prepared and I've done my homework, I can likely do a pretty good job of anticipating what you might be thinking about, what you might be working on, what other priorities might be going on in your world.
Love it. Well, in the spirit of trying to make this conversation valuable, we're running up on time, and I've run up to the end of my questions. And I want to ask you, Doug, is there anything I didn't ask that we should have covered that you think would be valuable to the audience on this topic?
I love how the lights are going out as we're talking. I know I got to keep standing up. I got to move around.
It's very like dramatic.
Action. Yeah, it was very dramatic. That was kind of perfect. Yeah, hold on, we're not done yet. But wait, just one more question. Was that who was the investigator that always asks wait, I have just one more question. Old guy. Show.
I don't know, Columbo?
Yeah, Columbo. I think it was Columbo. Yeah, there you go. I want to get everybody comfortable with the concept of situational fluency, because it just acknowledges the fact that sellers just are stepping into a way more dynamic and fluid environment. And so as leaders, as support, functions, we need to be thinking about how do we become more buyer ready? How do we help sellers do a better job of interpreting the situations? How do we support them to walk into any situation, even when the situation might change at the last minute? There's a level of situational awareness that I think we all need to be more acutely aware of. And then from that, I think we need to be thoughtful about like, how do we operationalize this buyer fluency? What did I call it? The BSOM, the buyer situation operating model. Is that right? Yeah, I think so. And take a look at your sales process and think like, where can I incorporate buyer situations? How do I change the questions we're all asking? One of the things you mentioned that came to mind was, part of the reason there's a guy named Dave Rudnitsky. I don't know if you remember him from Salesforce days. Like he's like OG, one of the best sales leaders ever. Because, he had this playbook of like, he was very clear about the questions. It's kind of like my belief right now, which is like, if you can't get your prospect to answer why changing might make sense, if you can't get them to put that into their own words and say that back to you, you don't have an opportunity.
That's the thing that I talked to you about offline. Like I try not to be, what's the word about it? Like combative about it, but like internally my mentality is like, if you can't sell me on why you have to solve your problem, why would I try to sell you that I have the solution to that problem?
Yep.
And the way that 100%. I like to approach that is like just asking simple questions. Like I've done this many times on a sales call, and it's like, so what happens if we just don't do anything for 6 months? Like, is that a big deal?
I mean,
and they're like, yeah, no, I mean, we're still good. It's like, what are my chances of winning that deal?
None. Very slim. 5%, 10%, maybe. You're a good looking man. So like, maybe they're just like, well, Eddie, I want to hang out with you. Like the reality is again, it goes back to that, like the fundamentals of like, why change, why now, why us, or whatever order you want to do it. But the first thing is like, you got to fully get them to think, well, changing might make a ton of sense. And here's why. Cool. Let's spend some time there. The flip side of that, as a leader, as a sales leader, you might ask, well, okay, why are they going to walk away from this deal? Why don't they want to do this deal? What could likely change in their situation that can get them to walk away from the table?
Yep.
Right. We had a deal working with a huge company, huge. I mean, been working on this deal for 6 months, maybe longer, and went all the way to the president, signed it. Like, sweet. Security review took months. Like, got it. We're good. We're in. Guess what? Next week, president got let go. New president came in, froze all deals.
Yep. I was working a deal recently, and I'm talking to the CMO and the CRO. And it's like, okay, like I know the CEO has to sign off on this. And it's like, can we win the CEO over this, that, and the other? And I'm going through this like very similar conversation to what you're describing with the CMO. We have a good relationship at this point. I'm trying to figure out how we get this thing done. And he's just like, oh yeah, by the way, like this CEO is going to be out in like a month. And it's like, okay, well, we're not getting his sign off. The old school mentality is like, well, okay, who's the decision maker? It's the CEO. So I've got to get in front of him. And then it's like, well, what's going on with the CEO? Well, he's going to be leaving the organization in a month. Okay. Well, shit. Well, shit. Okay. That throws a curveball on things.
Yeah. Well, and in that case, you're like, great. So what do you believe we can do? What do you believe is the best thing for us to do then?
Yep.
Think about that question. What do you believe? Get into your belief. What do you believe is the best thing for us to do? Well, I believe we can push it through. You do? Awesome. Let's push it through that.
Great way to end the podcast, Doug. We're at time. So I want to thank you for your time. How can people find you?
Doug at StoryPath.ai. Go to our website if you want to request access to it. I'll give you access. Find me on LinkedIn. Just Doug Landis.
Cool.
That's it.
I like how the lights go down as you close.
Yeah. Not intentional. Just luck.
Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it, man.
Thanks for listening to the episode. If this resonated, please give us a 5-star rating and a follow. It helps us reach more people, and you get our latest and greatest content without having to search for it. And if you're looking for hands-on help in go-to-market strategy and/or RevOps, please reach out to us. We help our clients with everything from annual planning to improving processes in go-to-market, implementing systems to support those processes, and go-to-market AI. We're always happy to offer a free consultation to help you identify the best opportunities to improve your go-to-market engine with or without our help. You can find us at unionsquareconsulting.com, and the info will be in our show notes.